Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So continuing with readings from Buddhadhamma. This is on page 886, and it's section B, starting with, it's called Happiness Beyond Sensation. And I'm just going to make a quick note here because I will be reading the first part of it and then skipping some and then doing a bit of rejigging, because in one section of this part here, he's talking about using a lot of references to the Pali word Vedana, which is usually translated as feeling. Sometimes, I think, at least from my understanding and reading of the suttas, that feeling tone is more apt than the usual feeling. But I don't know whether it's Payutto himself or Robin's translation, but in this section, he goes back and forth between using the word feeling and sensation as a translation for Vedana. And I found that actually, particularly in the section where he's talking about it a lot and going back and forth between using the word feeling and sensation, that it really seemed quite confusing to me. That sometimes the word sensation seemed like it was being used to refer to contact, but then he uses the word contact as well. So I just decided that instead of reading all of these things and getting into a huge discussion around what it actually means, to leave out some of it and then go to some more direct teachings from the suttas on Vedana itself. So with that in mind, the distinctive form of happiness is the 10th and final form, which, although it is classified as happiness, sukha, is not a sensation, vedana, nor does it require the enjoyment of sense objects. It can thus be called happiness beyond sensation, or happiness beyond feeling. It refers to the happiness associated with the cessation of perception and feeling, a concentrative state in which, as the name implies, is free of feeling or sensation. Some people may question how it can be a form of happiness if there is no sensation, because sukha is technically one form of vedana. But as confirmed by these words of the Buddha, there is a happiness that is not a feeling or sensation. Here, Ananda, by completely transcending the base of neither perception nor non-perception, a monk enters and dwells in the cessation of perception and feeling. This is that other kind of happiness more excellent and sublime than the previous kind of happiness. Now it is possible that wanderers of other sects might speak thus. The ascetic Gotama speaks of the cessation of perception and feeling, and he maintains that it is included in happiness. What is that? How is that? When wanderers of other sects speak thus, they should be told, the Blessed One, friends, does not describe a state as included in happiness only with reference to pleasant feeling. But rather, friends, wherever happiness is found, and in whatever way, the Tathagata describes that state as included in happiness. The cessation of perception and feeling is comparable to Nibbana, and the happiness independent of the enjoyment of sense objects, or happiness free from sensation or feeling, in this state is similar to the happiness of Nibbana. Venerable Sariputta explains this matter in the Nibbana Sutta, beginning with the statement, friends, this Nibbana is happiness. This Nibbana is happiness. And then there's a section here that kind of summarizes and paraphrases the Nibbana Sutta, but I thought rather than reading that, I just read the Nibbana Sutta itself from the Anguttara Nikaya Book of the Nines, number 34. Thus have I heard, On one occasion, the Venerable Sariputta was dwelling at Rajagaha in the bamboo grove, the squirrel sanctuary. There, the Venerable Sariputta addressed the bhikkhus. Friends, bhikkhus. Friend, those bhikkhus replied. The Venerable Sariputta said this. Happiness, friends, is this Nibbana. Happiness, friends, is this Nibbana. When this was said, the Venerable Udayi said to the Venerable Sariputta, But friend Sariputta, what happiness could there be here when nothing is felt here? Just this, friends, is the happiness here, that nothing is felt here. There are, friends, these 5 objects of sensual pleasure. What 5? Forms cognizable by the eye that are wished for, desired, agreeable, pleasing, connected with sensual pleasure, tantalizing. Sounds cognizable by the ear, odors cognizable by the nose, tastes cognizable by the tongue, tactile objects cognizable by the body that are wished for, desired, agreeable, pleasing, connected with sensual pleasure, tantalizing. These are the 5 objects of sensual pleasure. Any pleasure or joy that arises in dependence on these 5 objects of sensual pleasure is called sensual pleasure. Here, friends, secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states, a bhikkhu enters and dwells in the first jhana, which consists of rapture and pleasure born of seclusion, accompanied by thought and examination. If, while that bhikkhu is dwelling in this way, perception and attention accompanied by sensuality occur in him, he feels it as an affliction. Just as a pain might arise for one feeling pleasure only to afflict him, so too, if that perception and attention accompanied by sensuality occur in him, he feels it as an affliction. But the Blessed One has called affliction suffering. In this way, it can be understood how Nibbana is happiness. Again, with the subsiding of thought and examination, a bhikkhu enters and dwells in the second jhana. If, while that bhikkhu is dwelling in this way, perception and attention accompanied by thought occur in him, he feels it as an affliction. Because, as people probably are aware, that in the second jhana, thought, vitakka vichara, have subsided. So if there is a thought that occurs during second jhana, he feels it as an affliction. Just as pain might arise for one feeling pleasure only to afflict him, so too if that perception and attention accompanied by thought occur in him, he feels it as an affliction. But the Blessed One has called affliction suffering. In this way, too, it can be understood how Nibbana is happiness. Again, with the fading away as well of rapture, he enters and dwells in the third jhana. If, while that bhikkhu is dwelling in this way, perception and attention accompanied by rapture occur in him, he feels it as an affliction. Then, with the abandoning of pleasure and pain, a bhikkhu enters and dwells in the fourth jhana, and then he takes the same kind of approach, the sequence, all the way through the formless attainments up to the base of neither perception nor non-perception, with the same formula of entering into that base and then experiencing something from the previous base as an affliction. And then finally, again, by completely surmounting the base of neither perception nor non-perception, a bhikkhu enters and dwells in the cessation of perception and feeling. And having seen with wisdom, his taints are utterly destroyed. In this way, too, it can be understood how Nibbana is happiness. And then picking back up again with Payutto's book here on page 887. The spaciousness and ease inherent in each level of jhana, when there is no disturbance by mental application accompanied by perception, is an effective comparison for explaining the happiness of Nibbana. The happiness of Nibbana can thus be described as a state of freedom and fulfillment, in which there is no disturbance or stress. Venerable Sariputta here uses a method of explaining happiness by comparing it to suffering. A natural state of completeness, free from stress or agitation, is itself happiness. This explanation is consistent with the definition of Nibbana as a state free from illness, a state of perfect mental health. The Buddha said that one may not recognize good health, physical strength and well-being, and an ability to move about unrestricted, as happiness, because in that moment one is not necessarily enjoying any sense impressions. But when one compares such health to illness and affliction, one appreciates the paramount importance of good health. In other words, when stricken by disease, one clearly sees how good health, or a freedom from illness, is a sublime form of happiness. Just as an absence of physical illness, a state of complete physical health and freedom from affliction, is genuine happiness, so too a mind free from blemish, from latent anxiety, and from attachment to sense objects exists in a state of true happiness. It is spacious and expansive. Having realized this happiness, one dwells with a boundless mind. The happiness, delight, clarity, and spaciousness of a liberated mind is the exclusive and exceptional province of awakened beings. It is difficult for unawakened beings who have never shared this experience to fathom or conceive of it, but they can have at least an intuition that it is something truly excellent and noble. So that's the end of that section. And this next section C, perfect happiness, is where that, at least somewhat confusing to me, use of the word Vedana is talked about for a couple of pages. And as an alternative to that, I thought I would just read some excerpts from a discourse on Vedana in general, seeing that that's the term Vedana and the experience of that phenomena is something that's very pertinent to our experience of happiness. I thought I'd read a section from the Chula Vedala Sutta, where Visakha the layman is questioning Dhammadina, the Bhikkhuni Dhammadina, around a number of different topics. And this particular section of the sutta is regarding Vedana, here used as translated as feeling. This is Chula Vedala Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya, number 44, starting with section 22. Lady, how many kinds of feeling are there? Friend Visakha, there are 3 kinds of feeling: pleasant feeling, painful feeling, and neither painful nor pleasant feeling. But lady, what is pleasant feeling? What is painful feeling? What is neither painful nor pleasant feeling? Friend Visakha, whatever is felt bodily or mentally as pleasant and soothing is pleasant feeling. Whatever is felt bodily or mentally as painful and hurting is painful feeling. Whatever is felt bodily or mentally as neither soothing nor hurting is neither painful nor pleasant feeling. Lady, what is pleasant and what is painful in regard to pleasant feeling? What is painful and what is pleasant in regard to painful feeling? What is pleasant and what is painful in regard to neither painful nor pleasant feeling? Friend Visakha, pleasant feeling is pleasant when it persists, and painful when it changes. Painful feeling is painful when it persists, and pleasant when it changes. Neither painful nor pleasant feeling is pleasant when there is knowledge of it, and painful when there is no knowledge of it. Lady, what underlying tendency underlies pleasant feeling? What underlying tendency underlies painful feeling? What underlying tendency underlies neither painful nor pleasant feeling? Friend Visakha, the underlying tendency to lust underlies pleasant feeling. The underlying tendency to aversion underlies painful feeling. The underlying tendency to ignorance underlies neither painful nor pleasant feeling. Lady, does the underlying tendency to lust underlie all pleasant feeling? Does the underlying tendency to aversion underlie all painful feeling? Does the underlying tendency to ignorance underlie all neither painful nor pleasant feeling? Friend Visakha, the underlying tendency to lust does not underlie all pleasant feeling. The underlying tendency to aversion does not underlie all painful feeling. The underlying tendency to ignorance does not underlie all neither painful nor pleasant feeling. Lady, what should be abandoned in regard to pleasant feeling? What should be abandoned in regard to painful feeling? What should be abandoned in regard to neither painful nor pleasant feeling? Friend Visakha, the underlying tendency to lust should be abandoned in regard to pleasant feeling. The underlying tendency to aversion should be abandoned in regard to painful feeling. The underlying tendency to ignorance should be abandoned in regard to neither painful nor pleasant feeling. I think that these passages just underscore that often cited place within the cycle of dependent origination, where we have some power into helping to break the cycle of dependent origination at the level of feeling tone, so that just knowing, paying attention to the pleasantness or the unpleasantness or the neutrality, and abandoning the underlying tendency of lust, aversion, or ignorance in regards to them, is a point where the cycle of dependent origination can be broken up, and this quite succinctly points to that. Lady, does the underlying tendency to lust have to be abandoned in regard to all pleasant feeling? Does the underlying tendency to aversion have to be abandoned in regard to all painful feeling? Does the underlying tendency to ignorance have to be abandoned in regard to all neither painful nor pleasant feeling? Friend Visakha, the underlying tendency to lust does not have to be abandoned in regard to all pleasant feeling. The underlying tendency to aversion does not have to be abandoned in regard to all painful feeling. The underlying tendency to ignorance does not have to be abandoned in regard to all neither painful nor pleasant feeling. And then she explains, here, friend Visakha, quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states, a bhikkhu enters upon and abides in the first jhana, which is accompanied by applied and sustained thought, with rapture and pleasure born of seclusion. With that, he abandons lust, and the underlying tendency to lust does not underlie that. So that's the kind of pleasant feeling that lust does not underlie. The pleasant feeling of jhana. Here a bhikkhu considers thus, what shall I enter upon and abide in that base that the noble ones now enter upon and abide in? Or, I'm sorry, let me say that again. Here a bhikkhu considers thus, when shall I enter upon and abide in that base that the noble ones now enter upon and abide in? In one who thus generates a longing for the supreme liberations, grief arises with that longing as a condition. With that, he abandons aversion, and the underlying tendency to aversion does not underlie that. So this is an unpleasant feeling. That longing for liberation is an unpleasant feeling, but with there not being an underlying tendency to aversion associated. Here, with the abandoning of pleasure and pain, and with the previous disappearance of joy and grief, a bhikkhu enters upon and abides in the fourth jhana, which has neither pain nor pleasure and purity of mindfulness due to equanimity. With that, he abandons ignorance, and the underlying tendency to ignorance does not underlie that. So that experience of pure mindfulness and equanimity is a neither pleasant nor painful feeling that does not have ignorance underneath. Lady, what is the counterpart of pleasant feeling? And the word counterpart is a little bit confusing as it's used in the next paragraphs. But the footnote kind of explains it a little bit as the word counterpart, patibhaga, is used to express the relationships of both opposition and supplementation. So in some of these pairs, they're opposites of each other, and in some of them they are counterpart or similar supplements to each other. What is the counterpart of pleasant feeling? Friend Visakha, painful feeling is the counterpart of pleasant feeling. What is the counterpart of painful feeling? Pleasant feeling is the counterpart of painful feeling. What is the counterpart of neither painful nor pleasant feeling? Ignorance is the counterpart of neither painful nor pleasant feeling. What is the counterpart of ignorance? True knowledge is the counterpart of ignorance. What is the counterpart of true knowledge? Deliverance is the counterpart of true knowledge. What is the counterpart of deliverance? Nibbana is the counterpart of deliverance. Lady, what is the counterpart of Nibbana? Friend Visakha, you have pushed this line of questioning too far. You are not able to grasp the limit to questions. For the holy life, friend Visakha is grounded upon Nibbana, culminates in Nibbana, ends in Nibbana. If you wish, friend Visakha, go to the Blessed One and ask him about the meaning of this, as the Blessed One explains it to you, so you should remember it. And then the Buddha, he goes to the Buddha, and the Buddha supports Dhammadina's exposition and said that he would have explained it exactly the same way. So that's a bit on what I think is one of the most useful discourses about Vedana. Let's see. So picking up partway through that section that I skipped a fair amount of, starting back on page 891 in Dhamma, in Payutto's Buddhadhamma. This basic form of happiness is both a happiness in itself and also a support for the enjoyment of sense objects, and talking about the happiness of Nibbana. It can be described as a mental state of clarity and calm when there is no blemish, disturbance, or lingering anxiety in the mind. It can be called an empty mind, a pure mind, or a peaceful mind. A person endowed with such a state of mind can be considered as dwelling in happiness. Moreover, when a person with such a state of mind experiences sense impressions, whether they be sights, sounds, smells, tastes, or tangible objects, he or she experiences the pleasure of this contact to the full. This can be illustrated by looking at the opposite situation. Take, for example, someone eating whose mind at that time is not calm, who is sad, depressed, or beset by some other form of distress. Even if the food is delicious and of the kind that he normally enjoys, on this occasion he may not find it delicious. He may have to force himself to eat, or he may not be able to swallow the food at all. If, however, his mind is cheerful, he will savor the flavor of the food fully. Even if the food is not the best, he may find it delicious. Persons endowed with such internal or basic happiness are also able to enjoy the external happiness derived from sense objects. Besides benefiting from both kinds of happiness, internal and external, their mental capabilities are also enhanced. On the contrary, those persons who are deprived of this internal happiness lose out on both counts, both in terms of internal and external happiness. Moreover, their mental capabilities are also compromised. It is possible to cultivate this basic form of happiness and to make it more pure, prominent, and profound than most people are familiar with. One can get a sense of the happiness of Nibbana by way of this comparison. In sum, Nibbana is both a form of happiness itself, and it enhances one's ability to experience happiness. So I think I will end the readings there for today. Let's see if there's any questions or comments or remarks or thoughts. Yeah, I think the basic thrust, hopefully people are getting the idea of this, is that the happiness that's dependent, or that's not dependent on anything, any form of condition, is the highest. But that doesn't mean one doesn't still experience pleasant feeling and enjoyment of that based in the conditioned realm. It's just that one doesn't believe in it as anything that's going to provide any kind of lasting contentment. And as one realizes that, then one gradually lets go, little bit by little bit, of all of those kinds of conditioned happiness in preference to that which is not dependent on anything.
Would that be said it's because the knowing quality of mind is not really moved by it anymore? So it's partaken of, but it's no longer sought for or clung to, so the mind stays still and independent of the feelings?
Yes, yeah, I mean that would be a good way of putting it, and especially when, because something, especially if you're not expecting something, you can really delight in it. So much of what hampers our ability to enjoy is just all the expectations and proliferations that we have around it. And so when the mind is just, oh, look at that.